Tennessee football is number 8 in the college football playoff ranking. That came out yesterday. And here's the question for you. And I'll just ask you guys the first question. I'm typing up the poll question right now. Vols number 8 CFP ranking is too high, too low, or just right? And you guys feel free to comment on the message board now as we get going. And that'll be today's tough question. Is Tennessee's number 8 college football playoff ranking too high, too low, or just right? Today's tough question brought to you by City Heating and Air Conditioning. 50 years in East Tennessee. Integrity matters. cityheatandair.com. Tennessee is the second highest ranked 2-loss team in the college football playoff, just behind Georgia. So let me just break these down real quick. Number 1 is Oregon. Number 2 is Ohio State. Number 3 is Texas. Number 4 is Penn State. Number 5 is Notre Dame. Number 6 is Miami. Number 7 is Georgia. Number 8 is Tennessee. Number 9 is SMU. Number 10 is Indiana. Number 11 is Boise State. And number 12 is Clemson. And all the way down at 16 is Arizona State, who would get in as an auto bid as the 5th highest ranked conference champion. Of course, because of the automatic ties to conference champions getting the top 4 seeds, Tennessee wouldn't be affected by Arizona State, but they are affected by Boise State being below them because Boise State would get a top 4 seed, meaning Tennessee would be the number 9 seed if the college football playoff rankings ended today, and they would visit the number 8 seed Georgia Bulldogs. That's not something Tennessee fans want to do. Let's just be honest, guys. That is something Tennessee fans want to avoid at all costs. I don't think Georgia is Georgia could be a good matchup for Tennessee. That's not a game they want to deal with. It's not like they couldn't win. They did jump out to a 10-0 lead over Georgia at Georgia earlier this year, but a playoff game in Athens, that's certainly not something they want to deal with. So if this holds, Tennessee's not going to get what it wants. But here's the good news. Tennessee's 1 spot away from the number 8 seed, which would mean a home playoff game. Now, I talked yesterday about whether or not Tennessee wants a home playoff game or not, because that would typically probably mean the 8th seed, and that's still possible. But I will also add this. It's really hard to see who they would face in the second round based on the difficulties. And yeah, you don't want to face Oregon in the second round, but if you get a 10 or 7, you can face a Georgia in the second round if they bump up and beat Texas in the SEC title. So there are so many factors in play when you talk about that truth be told, because there's so many moving parts this year in the college football playoff, Tennessee's goal should just be to try to get a home playoff game and get a good draw. They're very close to that happening, guys. Again, Georgia's already punched their ticket to the SEC title game. Texas, who is number 3, if they win this weekend, they go to the SEC title game. One of those teams is going to lose that week. Now, Georgia's already beaten Texas, and if Georgia beats Texas again, you could maybe theoretically think that Texas would fall below Tennessee. If Georgia loses, they might fall below Tennessee. And the reason now the caveat to that, I will say, is that the college football playoff has made it clear they won't count conference title games against teams. But does that mean they won't count it against them in terms of putting them into the playoff, or that they won't count against them in terms of just seeding in general? We don't know. But it's not just Georgia, Texas to think about. Oregon and Ohio State are likely going to play for the Big Ten title, unless Ohio State loses to Michigan, at which point Oregon and Penn State will play for the Big Ten title. On top of that, Notre Dame has to visit USC this week in a very losable game. Miami's going to play SMU right now in the ACC title, assuming chalk holds. And this is all assuming chalk holds. So assuming chalk holds, there are 6 teams in the top 9 that are going to have to play each other in conference title games. Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia, and Miami and SMU. So there's a lot in play here. Beyond just chalk holding, there's a lot of upsets possible, guys. Let's just talk about the least likely first. I mean, look, okay, Michigan's probably not going to beat Ohio State. Maryland is certainly not going to beat Penn State. And I doubt Georgia Tech beats Georgia. But Texas A&M could beat Texas very well. They could. And if they do, Texas will drop below Tennessee. They don't have the schedule strength to back themselves up. And USC could definitely beat Notre Dame, at which point Tennessee would leapfrog them. So when you think about those, there's definitely a good chance that Tennessee gets to the 8th seed. There's a likelihood one of those things happen, assuming Tennessee beats Vanderbilt, which also is one of the games that could be an upset. But assuming Tennessee wins, the likelihood is greater than not that they get a home playoff game at this point, because it's more likely than not that somebody gets an upset, because all of these teams, I would say, are playing in like a 60% chance of winning, and one of them could fall. So if Tennessee does get the 8th seed, what happens? Well, SMU right now is the 9th seed. Tennessee could theoretically get a home playoff game against SMU. That is the best possible draw you could ask for if you're Tennessee, to get a home playoff game against a team that we all know is not good enough really to play in this event. To do that would be huge. And guys, Tennessee could very well have that happen. Now, again, caveat, Miami and SMU could play for the ACC title. We don't know how that's all going to work out. So if that happens, one of them could fall below. You know, the scary part for Tennessee is that Miami could fall to the 9th seed and Tennessee hosts Miami. I think Miami is better than SMU. Tennessee probably doesn't want to deal with Cam Ward. On the other hand, then there's Indiana, who is sitting at 10-1. Miami could leapfrog Indiana, at which point Tennessee would get a home game against Indiana. So I think the most likely scenario in this moment, gun to my head, guys, the two most plausible scenarios are Tennessee host Miami. I'm sorry, not Miami. Tennessee host SMU or Tennessee host Indiana. And that would be a huge, huge, huge boost to the Vols. They would probably likely get to the second round at that point. And here's something even more fun. Oregon's the top seed. There's one interesting fun thing about Tennessee. They've never won a Rose Bowl game in history. Oregon, as the Big Ten champ in the first round, would as the top seed would play in the Rose Bowl. Tennessee could go play Oregon in the Rose Bowl, and it would be their first chance to ever win the Rose Bowl. Just a little bit of college football tradition there for you guys. But there's still a lot to play for, a lot of factors in play. As we continue to dive in, I want to point out that the show represented by Banks & Jones.
Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott Jones. BanksandJones.com.
All right, welcome back. So our poll question that we have up right now, what do you make of Tennessee's number 8 CFP ranking? 9% say too high, 25% say too low, but 66% say just right. Kind of a lean with you guys, just right. So Zach asked, how can Tennessee host? A couple other questions on this. So Zach, Tennessee can host because, teams, as Stephen Berryman points out, 5 to 8 would host the first round games. Tennessee's number 8 right now, but they would be the number 9 seed because one of the auto bids is below them in the actual rankings. So that's kind of how that would work out. I think I'm going to reset the poll question real quick. What's most likely for Tennessee? What is Tennessee's most likely first round CFP game? I'm going to say visiting Georgia, hosting SMU, hosting Indiana, or another outcome. You guys let me know on this, and bear with me since I'm the only one I'm doing the poll questions and I'm hosting the show today. So that's why there's a little bit of a pause when those things happen. But let's talk about that. What is the most likely and what would you most want? If I'm Tennessee, I probably would prefer to host SMU, but I could be convinced to host Indiana. Indiana looked horrible against Ohio State. You obviously don't want to visit Georgia. That's what you don't want. Indiana looked absolutely horrible against Ohio State. They lost 38-15, and that game should have been 55-7. I would make the argument they don't belong in the playoff because they have nothing to fall back on. And truth be told, this isn't an SEC bias for people that point that out. I think Clemson should be in over Indiana. I do. I think Clemson should be in over Indiana at 2 losses. I think Boise State should be higher than Indiana. And I think Arizona State down at 16 should be higher than Indiana, honestly. All these teams have way better resumes than Indiana. I mean, I just have to point that out. So Indiana's resume, to be fair, the strength of schedule has bumped up to number 50 just by playing Ohio State, but they haven't beaten anybody good. So it's not just who you play. It's not just playing teams. It's actually beating somebody worthwhile. And Indiana has beaten, I think the season will end with them having beaten one team that makes a bowl game. And now you can point out Tennessee, their best win is a 3-loss Alabama, and Texas's best win is a Vanderbilt, but they've both played a bunch of 6 to 7-ish wins teams that they've beaten. That's more than Indiana has, and that's the big deal. So truth be told, Indiana's schedule is absolutely awful. There's an argument very clearly that they should be left out. And I don't think there's anything wrong with making that case, if you ask me. I just think that their strength of schedule is just flat out miserable and abysmal.